nailing it. You just don't know. It's one of those subconscious awareness things.
Can you disconnect?
No, you raised your hand, and now you're pointing to her. You're like, yes.
Can you disconnect your battery so your converter's not charging your battery? It sends all the power. I mean, just disconnect your battery.
Do you just want to get up here and teach?
No.
Why are you stealing my thunder?
I'm sorry.
No. But you do have, well, there was a +10 intelligence. You have a goatee, yes. Did that come out wrong?
Somewhere.
I was
It's a partial
I was good. No, that's exactly. And now you go ahead and repeat it because I don't want to steal it from you. Just a little bit louder so they can hear you.
Can you disconnect your battery so your power is going all to your jacks, not trying to charge your battery?
Yes, disconnect your battery. All you got to do is go to the negative post on your battery and disconnect it. Your converter is also a charger, right? You have what we call a converter charger. All RVs have them. They're hidden because they're electric. They don't want you to get in there and finding it, so you don't know where it's at. But all you have to do is go to your battery and disconnect your battery. Now, why would it work if you disconnect your battery? Right, because there's only so much power that converter can push out, typically anywhere between 800 watts up to 1,000 watts, depending on what size converter you have. Well, if your battery is dead, it's drawing a load. It wants to be charged. Electrons, I've talked to them. I've learned a lot by them. They're kind of like men, right? We'll find out that they'll only have, one emotion, anger, right? And they only want to go one place, home, right? Well, they have a choice. They are lazy. Now, think of your kids. I think we've all had kids, right? Electrons are also lazy. So if it goes out of the converter, it's got one of two things to do. It says, oh, I can go over to the slide out over here and move the slide out or the leveling gear, or I can go to the battery and just party with all the other electrons. So guess what? They're all going to the battery, right? 90% of that power from your converter, if you have a dead battery, it's going to the battery. You don't have enough power to get your heavy stuff out, your landing gear this way, leveling, slide outs that way. So all you have to do is disconnect that battery. Now you've taken away their choice. Isn't that better for our kids, like whenever we ask them, what do you want to eat? Ooh. Take away the choice. This is what you're getting. You feel so much better, and of course, they're eating broccoli now. So you're right. You're absolutely right. So if you just take away that load, then of course the stuff will go back out. So you don't need to carry anything else. You just have to understand how everything works. So here we go. Up on the screen here, if I were to pull back the wall and show you pretty much how everything is set up when it comes to our electrical systems. Let me just make sure I got my left and right. Okay. So on the right side, you'll see everything that is 12 volts. On the right side, you have everything 12 volts. So the source of power is our battery. It goes up to our 12-volt DC panel. Now, what's a 12-volt DC panel? Thank you for being so exciting with your answers.
I got one.
The circuit, I can almost hear you. Yeah, circuit breaker panel. Yes, go ahead.
Inverter.
What was my question? All right, so let's think of it this way. We're talking about, he said a circuit breaker panel. Can I tell you that the circuit breaker panel, whether it's 12 volts or 120 volts, I'm gonna make it a little bit simpler. How many of you have a power strip? This is class participation. I think you all, at some point, had a power strip, right? So when we take a power strip, we've got one source of power. We have one cord, we plug that in, and what do we make of it? Multiple, right? So a breaker panel box or a circuit breaker panel box is taking that one source of power, which is coming from the battery, and just separating it into different circuits. Now, when we separate it in different circuits, what do we put in there? What's the protection we put in there? Fuses. Oh, you guys are getting it now, right? So that's all that a circuit panel box is, okay? Now, you may have one that's separated, but most of us, they're combined. Both are 12 volts and 120 volts. Most of them, right? So you just have your circuit panel box. Have everyone found where the circuit panel box is? The dreaded circuit panel box? It's a bad day when you go looking for it, right? Because it's not like you go visit it and talk to it or anything else. It's only when something goes wrong, you go there, and then you just look at it. Yep. That's what that is. All right, so you're checking fuses or you're checking breakers. Hopefully you're just, fumbling around trying to turn it on, okay? So all we're doing is taking the battery, those cables going up, going into a circuit panel box, and splitting them off into different circuits. If you look on the left side, you have 120 volts, right? You've got your source of power there. Let's just say it's shore power. It goes into the circuit panel box, and then from there, we just break it up into different circuits. So think of it as just a big power strip, both 12 volts and 120 volts, right? So therefore, if you know it's a power strip, then it's not as scary to deal with it, okay? So we got those separated, and then there's only one thing in between my 120 volts and my 12 volts. What is that? My converter charger, okay? It's going to take that 120 volts and step it down to 12 volts, and what it does is it helps charge the battery when the battery is low, but it also helps the battery converts that electricity from 120 volts down to 12 and helps the battery out when we have heavy loads. In an RV, we may have one heavy load or we may have a bunch of small loads, and that's where the converter comes to help out. Yes, ma'am. Sir, sorry.
Quite right. So I get 5 points.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In the 120 volt breaker, you obviously have there's two different power strips. One runs off the converter for the things that work on the battery, and there's ones that only work when you're plugged in, like the microwave.
Short power. 120 volts one side, 12 volts on the
Are
other.
they easy to figure out if you want to change a plug that, like my rig, they put a nice plug by the front passenger seat to plug in your laptop while you're driving down the road. That doesn't work on the converter.
No, it doesn't.
Why not? And can you change that?
Okay, so a converter does what? It takes 120 volts and steps it down to 12.
No, I'm talking about inverter. It doesn't run on the inverter. So the
Does
inverter
it?
takes 12 volt DC, turns it into 120, right?
Uh-huh.
Why? And I want to be able to use that while I'm driving down the road, or she wants to use it.
Okay.
Driving down the road. Not me.
All right, I was because we're on film. I'm not going to tell
Yeah.
you how to you work on your computer while you're driving down the road.
No.
They will pull my license. Yeah, so you can do that. So you have an inverter. Now, this is a little bit different from a converter. What does an inverter do, people? Okay, so it takes the 12 volts, nominally 12 volts, and creates AC voltage. Okay, and so you have an inverter in your rig, but you don't have a convenient plug for your inverter. So you probably have a little bit smaller inverter. It's probably running just your refrigerator or something else. Is that correct? A 200-watt inverter is what you have. So it's a little portable one? 2,000 watts, right? What's a zero between friends, right? Okay, so it is a whole house, and you're saying the particular outlet that's close to you doesn't have the inverter, or there's no outlet there. Okay, so you do have a smaller inverter that's probably not whole house. Okay, what we can do is we can change that inverter out to something larger that takes care of the whole house. I think your question is it easy for us to move the circuitry over there? It's possible. It is possible, but let's think about this. Your walls are already formed, right? That cable is in between the walls or maybe up under the flooring. If you have a motorhome, a little bit more difficult to rewire that versus just putting in a larger whole house inverter that takes care of all the outlets. So a couple options there. All right. So just understand that we have, okay, yes. I'm sorry.
In his scenario, he could actually go to his breaker panel if it's only doing half a load. He could swap breakers with something
Swap
else
breakers?
that's not be used.
Right. But if it's hooked up to his refrigerator, he's kind of he's
Not the whole
forfeiting.
inverter. Like if he's got a breaker on that's not a breaker that's not on the load, that's only doing like his washer and dryer.
So
He
typically,
can swap those breakers on the different loads if it doesn't overload the other side.
well, if it's going, and that's what I was saying, if it goes to the breaker panel box, that's what we call a whole house inverter. if it's just going to one item, it doesn't go to the circuit panel box. It's just one circuit by itself. It's independent. It does go to the circuit box. Look at what year is your rig? 2019. Okay, well look at it and see. There's something that I just don't understand, because if it's going in the circuit panel box, that whole bus bar is lit up. Yes.
So we got a 2021, and ours was doing the same thing. We had a 2,000 watt inverter, and only one side of our breaker panel worked on the inverter. So we upgraded our inverter to a 3,000 watt multi plus 2 120.
Oh, just go ahead and drop the name. Okay.
Sorry,
Good job.
not a plug, but
Yeah.
it solved our problem, and now both sides of our breaker panel work off batteries or shore power.
And that's where I'm leaning as well. Okay. So, man, you got a lot of questions on that. That's great. All right, so just understand we have the two different voltages that are coming in. The whole goal of this is to understand we have limited power, right? Everything that we have that runs on electricity has some type of data plate on there, and we look at these data plates and they are just Greek to us. Some data plates, they give us some information about the power. It may be recorded in watts. Some of the data plates, it may be recorded in amps. They never give you everything. You ever notice that? Engineers, do I have any engineers in here? Okay. So he gladly raised his hand. Right? So, not a real engineer. All right, so for whatever reason, however they put this together, they only give you one or two of those numbers. They don't give you everything. So what I want to do is just go over how we actually quantify electricity, if that's okay. Now, in order to quantify electricity, we got to look at the different variables of it. And the first one we'll look at is volts. Now, first off, what is volt? Where did we get the word volt? It's the last name of some dude who kind of figured this out. So it's Dude Volts, right? It's his last name, right? This is how it all comes out. If you ever wondered, this is where we got the name. Now, volts. What he was looking at is how much pressure is being applied. And when we have voltage, how much pressure. Now, in our rig, we typically have two. What were the two forms of pressure we have? 12 and 120, okay? Which one seems to be larger? 120, okay? And it's the amount of pressure that we have. It's the pushing and pulling of electrons, okay? So let's think of it this way. You ever push started a car? Okay. Now, back in, whenever I was in high school, I opted to go ahead and buy a Mustang. It didn't have a starter, but I didn't care because it was a Mustang. I had a lot of friends, so I didn't need a starter because I had a car. I had 2 or 3 starters because it was a standard, right? So let's think of this. I have that vehicle, it's standard. I'm sitting there. I got it set in, second gear because I've learned, if I didn't like my friends, I'd put it in first gear. Pop that clutch, whack. You got one person pushing. That's like 12 volts. One friend pushing your car. What's the hardest part of pushing the car? Getting it started, right? Objects at rest tend to stay at rest. Okay. Well, if you have 4 or 5 friends pushing, that's equivalent to, say, 120 volts. It's the amount of pressure being applied. That's what we look at when we're talking voltage. And so in our rigs, we typically have 2 types, 12 and 120. The 12 really never does the 120 unless there's an inverter, but typically we have 12-volt circuitry and we have 120-volt circuitry. Never really do we have anything in between, okay? Now let's think of it this way. I know that electricity is hard to see, except for at night when there's lightning or something like that, so we'll equate it to water, and it's the amount of pressure, and say in a water hose. When you open up the hose bib and you've got a lot of pressure, we'll say that's like voltage, the pushing of electrons. Are we good so far? Yes, Todd, we're good. Hey, I love your excitement and enthusiasm that you guys have. Well, you didn't have to clap. I'm just participation, It's kind of like a relationship here. I'm trying to build a relationship and there's no communication. I didn't ask for false praise. Just, okay, spouses, You type something out to your spouse, half a book, and then the reply is, okay. That's what I kind of feel like right now. I'm giving you a bunch, and you guys are giving me, okay. I'm not asking for praise. I'm just thinking, yeah, that makes sense, Todd. You know, I thank you. You know, I may have known it. Just kind of a recap. Wow, I never knew this. Whichever it is, that would be great. All right, so let's try this again. Are we okay? Are we good with the voltage? All right. Let's talk amperage. Now, amperage is flow. Amperage is flow, okay? And so it's the amount of electrons actually moving. So the first one we have voltage, and what is voltage? Pressure. What is amperage? Sounds like the, you know, a name of a bad 70s group, you know, pressure and flow. See, you know my audience. They've been around for that, right? Okay. So we look at it, it's the flow of electrons. So let's think of it this way. I can have just a regular water hose, or I can have a fire hose, right? I can have the same amount of pressure being applied both to my water, you know, my regular water hose, 5/8 inch water hose, versus a fire hose, which is 2 inches. Which one do you think is going to flow more freely? The fire hose, okay? So when we're talking electrons, oh, by the way, did you know electrons take up space? Tiny amounts, but they take up space, okay? Isn't that awesome? And that one was for free. So understanding amps, when we look at amps, we're actually quantifying how much flow that we have, how many electrons are we actually pushing. And if electrons take up space, what does that tell us about our wires? The more flow we have, the bigger the wire we need. We have all these electrons dancing on that wire. We can only get so many electrons dancing on that wire if it's only so big. So our 30 amp wire, 30 amp cable is smaller than our 50 amp cable. Does it make sense? All right. Yes. See, now we're getting it. We're like in the second week of our relationship. This is nice. Okay. What's that? I gave you the second. Yes, I'm forgiving that way. I said, did I give you the second date? Yes. All right. Now, why is this important? Because, you know, you've already bought your rig. Now, how many of you have bought the 30 amp rig and now you're kind of rethinking things? I'm not too quite sure. Okay. Maybe, maybe not. All right. Now, here's the problem that we have. It doesn't matter whether you've already chosen your rig or not. It's whenever we go somewhere else, and let's say we're going to a park, or let's go into a national park. We're a 50 amp service, and we're plugging into shore power that only has 30 amps. Do you think the cable behind whatever they set up was big enough to handle 50 amps? No. Right? So you're limited to 30 amps. My whole goal is what I'm building here, and these are just building blocks, is to understand how much power you're using, because it's up to you to manage these electrons. And you can ask for too much power. You can ask for too much power, and we end up messing up our cables, right? We end up messing up, burning up things, and I'm going to show you how to be aware of these things. So therefore, whenever you do have those occasions, whenever you're out either at the national park or you're mooch docking. Now, what's mooch docking for some of the new people here? Stealing from your neighbors, right? You're mooching their power. Hey, you got a driveway? So now you either got your 50 amp cord or your 30 amp cord, and you are dog boning that down to 15 amps. Now, how many of you think you can manage that, right? You can manage that? Remember, I told you there was two things that are always on that you don't think about, right? The converter and, of course, maybe the water heater. Now, some of you go, Todd, I'm not as lazy as you. If that light is red, I'll go ahead and turn it off. Okay, great for you. You still have your converter on. Now, when you're plugged in, and I told you that 12 volts, you think that your lights are running off your battery or your converter? Okay, so if it's running off your battery, you have a charger that's always charging that battery. If it's running off the converter, then it's running off the converter. What's the source of power of that converter charger? The 120 volts, right? we can have upwards of 9 amps when we get to that system. And so if you have a 30 amp service and you're running all your lights, you got your fan on, no big deal. I've got a magical battery that's taking care of everything, right? It's coming off that converter. All right, so let's start putting this together. We talked volts and we've talked amps. Now here's a little class participation. I'd like for you to put your arms together and make an X. There we go. If you don't do it, you don't pass. All right, hold it up. Here's your first rule. Volts times amps equals watts. Now, why are you putting it down? I don't know why this happens, but every time I do that, people go, great, I put it down. Do you see the V? When you do this here, do you see the V? Volts. Do you see the X? I hope so. All right, do you see the A down below? All right, now you can put your hands down. Volts times amps equals watts. Now, okay, what is a watt? No, that's the last name of some dude named Watt, right? But it's the amount of work. Volts times amps equals watts. It's the amount of work that can be produced, all right? So whenever we're looking at things, it doesn't matter whether it's our microwave, our Keurig coffee pot, whatever it may be, we're going to have these little data plates. We need to find out how much power we're actually using. And I think a lot of us, what we do is we just plug it in, and if it works, it's great. If it doesn't, pops the breaker. Well, that may be too much. Right? So what I want to do is we're going to learn this management. Volts times amps equals watts. All right? Because we are learning about limited power. Okay? So watts is nothing more than the relationship of volts and amps. Watts is nothing more than the relationship of volts and amps. Now, you'll see in this picture, and this is kind of fun, you'll see a picture of a water tower. Does anyone know what a water tower does? Raise your hands. Okay, so this is where you're going to answer. So, yes.
Water tower is, it takes the pressure, the water's up on top, and it's a natural pressure to move the water flow.
Okay. So what does it do?
I'm lost.
I know. I apologize. I put you on the spot. My apologies.
It increases the pressure of the water.
Increases the pressure of the water. Okay. Wouldn't you think the city would have a big enough water pump to take care of things? Well, here's the thing. Okay. I've got a question or an answer back here. Yes, ma'am.
It's water storage.
Water storage. Okay. Well, let's put it all together. Okay. There's actually 2 times a day in every municipality that we actually exceed what the city pumps can do. So we have city water pumps, and if we're just kind of each using it individually differently, we got enough pressure. There's 2 times a day, though, that we all kind of gang up on our water. What 2 times a day is that? Morning and evening. What are we doing typically in the morning? Shower. I think half of you said that. The other people go, oh, yeah, shower. Brush our teeth? I don't know. And then the evenings, washing clothes, right? Well, that's a lot of water. Both of those is a lot of water. Well, even with the city, we have water pumps. They provide a certain amount of pressure. And if we all exceed that demand, we all turn on our water, then what happens is the pressure drops. Water, where does water want to go? Home. It wants to go just like electrons, right? There's gravity. Well, if we take water and we push it up in the air, water is what, 8.34 pounds per gallon? We take a couple thousand gallons and we hover it up in the air, that's going to create a lot of downward force, a lot of pressure from gravity. Well, if we put that in line with our pump, and of course the lines coming to it, whenever the pumps actually can't keep up with the pressure, then the gravity itself actually pushes that water through and we're none the wiser, right? So how do we relate that to electricity when I'm talking about watts? Does that make sense? See, now I know that was fake. It does not make sense because I haven't told the story. All right, so let me tell you how we can look at this water tower. How many of you just now figured out that's what a water tower does? Right? I had a guy in my class who was from, no. I had a guy in my class who's from New York. He goes, literally, I thought that's just something you tag. That's what he told me, Didn't know it really did that. Now, tag, paint it, graffiti. Yeah. Now, let me go ahead and add this, though. When is the water tower on? Always. So is it, well, I can actually tell you there's 2 times a day the water tower is not on. That's when it's being used, right? Because when it's being used, it's gravity. When the water tower is on, we're actually taking that water and pumping it up back into there, right? So most of the time the water tower is on. When we're actually using it, that's when the water tower is not using any power. Just a little tidbit of information for you. Okay. You're very welcome. See, now we're getting this, right? Man, I feel the energy. It's a lot of love in here. This is great. All right, so how am I going to take this water tower and equate it to electricity? How, you ask? Thank you for asking. I will go ahead and tell you. This right here is actually a water tower that's right adjacent to TSTC College, and this is where Cooper used to teach at the college there, and he would teach, of course, technicians. His class was an adjunct, so it was a building adjunct, that was out, and it was actually adjacent to an airfield. Okay, this airfield had a separation between the airfield and the college was, of course, a fence, and his facility, just like this, was right across that fence. His class was always after lunch. Cooper would always get a call from the dean every single day. Hey, can you tell your guys to knock it off? They're sitting there playing music and it's disrupting everyone else. Guys, think back to when you were in college. Some of you, it's been a while, so I'll wait. Right? So you got a bunch of college students out there. Can you see? They're you remember back when you were in college or, the college age, you knew everything and you couldn't be told anything. Every single day, Cooper would get a call from the dean. Hey, can you tell you guys to knock it off? One day, he didn't get a call. Right? And those of you who are parents, you kind of see this, right? Because when you first have children, you just wait for the day that they're quiet. Right? And then after they're quiet for more than 5 minutes, you get on alert, don't you? This is not right. Well, he's walking up. There was no call. He's walking up. There's 20 students, and they're all sitting down quietly. Does that make sense? You got a bunch of 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds. Do you think they're going to do that? No. So he walks up to them. They're sitting there quiet. Of course, the first question is, okay, what did you guys do? No one says anything, for a moment. Then finally the squealer. Well, what had happened was, and then we have the story. Well, Mr. Cooper, we were just doing our own thing. We were setting up on the canisters. We have, just like what we have out here, these, can't even think of them now what they're called, the connexes, thank you. Setting up on the connexes because we knew Air Force One was going to land today. See, this TSTC College is right here in Waco, and this is at the time whenever we had George W. Bush in office. You remember W? All right. Well, his father... Well, he had a ranch out here in Crawford, Texas, and so Air Force One would land at the airstrip right there adjacent to the college. We were just standing up there, minding our own business. We were waiting for Air Force One to land. We just wanted to look at it. We're doing our own thing, sending on these, what's the word again, Brian? Connex. I keep wanting to say canister. All right, we're standing on our connexes, and everything's fine. About this time, a black SUV on the other side of the fence pulls up. Gentleman gets out in his suit and he says, "Gentlemen, I need you to get off the connexes." Now let's think about this. You have one adult telling a bunch of teenagers what to do. Do you think they complied? No. So of course there's this little back and forth, hey, I need you to get off. Can't explain why because he's in a black SUV wearing a suit. Come on, we all know what's going on. Right? So after back and forth, hey, look, we're not getting down. This is our property because now all of a sudden they own that Connex. And we're on our property. You're over there. We're not bothering anything. All we want to do is, watch Air Force One land. So he finally gets their attention. Says, all right. Can I direct your attention? Go ahead and look at this water tower right here. So they're all looking at it. And so then he gets over on the CB and he says, okay, go ahead and show them. About that time, a black silhouette stands up, holding a rifle this big, and he's waving it back and forth. What do you think the teenagers did then? They got down. Okay? So then the question is now what happened? There's a sniper up there. That sniper is there just in case something went wrong, right? He can go ahead and take them out. Now, he wanted them off the Connex, so that way he wouldn't feel guilty should he miss and hit a student, right? So if there's a fence there, then he doesn't feel guilty. That's what I was thinking. Okay, so you got off the Connex. Do you think the fence is going to stop that bullet? Okay, so who had the power to get those kids off the Connex? Was it the guy in the SUV, or was it the black silhouette on the water tower? All right, so hopefully this story sticks, because now every time you're driving down the road and you see a water tower, what are you going to think? Power. You're going to think power, people. Power. You got to have the power. Watts, okay? Watts is power, and that's the relationship between volts and amps. How much power does it take in order to run a specific device? Well, if we know that volts and we know that amps, volts times amps equals watts, we can start figuring things out, okay? So let's just have a little fun with this. Oh, before I get to wire size. Volts times amps equals watts. So those of you that have a 30 amp rig, go ahead and raise your hand. Let's go ahead and do the math. We got 30 amps times 120 volts. How many potential watts can we use in our rig? 3,600 watts. I like your math, right? 3,600 watts. That sounds like a lot, right? A typical air conditioner on a 20 amp circuit can pull upwards of 2,400 watts, right? Whenever it kicks on or something like that, or if it's hot, you're in the armpit of America, South Florida. I mean, I love it there, but come on, let's think about this. It's hot, it's sweaty. It's the armpit. You're there, and I don't understand this. I have learned the longer you RV, the less susceptible you are to temperature change, right? Your RV has wheels. You're not going anywhere that's 100 degrees. You're not going anywhere that's 40 degrees. If you're going to either one of those, you're RVing wrong. But for whatever reason, Florida is the Mecca, right? As RVers, we all got to go there. We have to go that way, right? You got 3,600 watts. You got your air conditioner on. It can pull upwards of 2,400 watts. How much do you have left? Not enough to make coffee, right? Not enough to make coffee. And this is what we want to start looking at. I want you guys to kind of do an assessment of what power, what consumption you're using, okay? Now, I have on your desk, of course, the little sheets there just to help out with some of this information. That is what it's for, just to give you some of the typical information, the typical power consumption of a lot of the stuff that we use in our rigs. Now, am I asking you to go on an energy diet? No. Right? Because we all know that diets work. I'm living proof of it, right? We all start off. I just want you to be aware, because if you can't turn them all on at once, then you know that there's certain things, hey, look, I can turn this on, but I can't turn this on at the same time.